avoid the victim mentality.
Mm.
Okay. Avoid the victim mentality. I've seen people go out on LinkedIn and talk about recruiters ghosting them. And, I've sent out 1,000 resumes, and I, I say this very carefully, but I would almost guarantee that talking to that person, 1,000 resumes, really, you have one area that you're focusing on. You sent 1,000 resumes out for that, and you didn't get any interviews. There's probably a few problems here. You sent it
Yep.
out to maybe 10 different positions within a company, which most companies don't like that because they're like, what does this person want to do? Do they want
Yeah.
to be a project manager? Do they want to be a field service technician? Like, what do they want to be? Um, or they are not tailoring their resumes to the position. They're not doing their research. They're just doing that, spray and pray
Yeah.
type of job search. And I'm all about quality over quantity.
If you've identified your skill set and you validated it with a certification, now you are about to put it all to work, right? And start the job search. So, welcome to the Military Transition Academy podcast. In today's episode, you'll hear from Tiffany Bradbury, a former Air Force recruiter with 15 years of experience who's transitioned not once, but twice, and now recruits for Reliant Critical Infrastructure. Tiffany is going to pull back the curtain on how recruiters really think, from resumes and interviews to what makes you stand out in a crowded field, especially in today's job market. So, if you've ever wondered what happens after you hit apply, this is your inside look. Let's dive in. Welcome, Tiffany, to the show. I'd love for you to introduce yourself to the audience.
Thank you so much for having me, Misty. This is probably one of my favorite things to do. I love talking to the veterans and about the transition, because obviously I've been there myself. I did spend 23 years total in the Air Force, but that's combined service between the Air National Guard and active duty Air Force. My first transition, I got out after my first enlistment, joined the Air National Guard for about 3 years, and then I missed being on active duty. So I actually had the opportunity to come back in as an Air Force recruiter, and I spent the last 15 years there. And honestly, I learned a lot in my transition, which one we'll talk about today, the first time. Because I was not prepared at all. So I made sure that I was going to promise to myself that I would be more prepared when it came time to transition the next time. So fast forward 15 years, I ended up working in a nonprofit employment service or veteran service organization as an employment coordinator. And then I then transitioned after a few years to the company that I'm currently at, Reliant Critical Infrastructure. So I've learned a lot of things along the way, not only from my own experience, but for recruiting for multiple different corporations and companies, and then also working with the veteran candidates. So I like to share that information so that those struggles aren't as difficult as they shouldn't be, I should say. So
Yeah, and I believe that you and I are where we're at now because of the veterans before us, right? And so when veterans get on to podcasts or onto LinkedIn or blogs or social media and share tips, tools, techniques, methods on how to officially transition from the military to the civilian sector, that's where the real magic happens, right? And when we think about the military transition, we also have to recognize that there's two parts, right? One part is the logistics, right? Where am I going to live? Where am I going to work? Medical, life insurance, whatever it may be, right? VA disability. But that the other part is probably the most difficult, and that's that mental transformation. So take us back to transition number one. And so I love talking to people that have two different transitions because usually it's my first transition, oh my gosh, what was I doing? My second transition, now I'm prepared, ready to go. So take us back to Tiffany, transition number one.
okay. So transition number one, I joined the Air Force not, and I'll just take this way back because I joined the Air Force not because it was a call to service or anything like that at that time, right? I joined the Air Force because I was 22 years old, wasn't going to college anymore, and I lived in a small town in Missouri, and there really was no opportunity for me there. So I met someone that had been in the Air Force, and they led me to that door. So I was like, oh, I'm going to join the Air Force. They have all these great benefits. I'm not going to have to worry about anything, and I'll make it a career. Well, fast forward 4 years later, I married my husband, who I'm still with almost 30 years later. And
Woohoo!
we got married yeah, we're both retired Air Force. And so we got married. I did my first enlistment, and then my enlistment was coming up. It just kind of happens very quickly. That 4 years goes by so fast. And we were in a AFSC where he had already PCSed, and they were telling me it was probably going to be 6 months before I could be with him because there wasn't an available slot for me.
Yeah.
So I made the decision to get out at that point in time. So I had a little bit of a cushion, right? Because I had that, insurance. I was covered under him. He was still making a decent income. Um, and so at that time, I was like, okay, well, we'll just no preparation, right? I'm just going to get out and see what's on the outside because, I have this 4 years of experience in supply chain and, they're going to be chomping at the bit to hire me. Well, that was not the case. I spent probably 4 months. I'd never been employed since I was 16 years old. Every job I'd ever applied for, I was very fortunate I got. Now, mind you, they were, minimum wage type jobs, but I had never experienced rejection before.
Yeah.
So I stood in the unemployment line for the first time. That was humbling. I was still young, but I did not know. Like I didn't know what I didn't know, was what we always tell people, right? So I was totally unprepared. I hadn't completed my degree. I hadn't done anything to really set myself up for success after the military. So I was turned down by Home Depot. I was turned down by, all of these. I mean, I was desperation. I took the Postal Service test. I got turned down by them. And so I ended up, getting a decent job, but I was driving probably an hour one way to work, if not more. Um, and I just kept telling my husband, gosh, I would have never gotten out of the Air Force. And he was still in at that time. And he ended up being attached as a special duty to a recruiting squadron. So he said, hey, if you want to come back on active duty, we can get you back into a
Wow.
recruiting slot. I think there's an opportunity like right there where we lived. So that was my catalyst. I was very fortunate to be able to come back on active duty as a recruiter. But, I learned a lot and told myself I'd never be that unprepared again. So that was the
Yeah, and
first.
I think a lot of people try to get ready, right? I don't know if you can actually get ready. It's like trying to get ready to have a kid or ready to get married or ready to whatever it may be. It's like
Right.
what is ready, right? Ready is very subjective. There are a
Yeah.
lot of things that we can do to get prepared and to give yourself, a little bit of grace. It's like again, you just don't know what you don't know, right? And back
Yeah.
when you transitioned the first time, there weren't these military influencer conferences and, military influencers on LinkedIn and podcasts like this. I mean, this is just in the last 10 to 12 years. And so we do have to really look at the landscape when you transition and the people before us that did not have these resources. And so that's why it's really critical to start listening and stop thinking that you know better, right? Because you don't know what you don't know. So now fast forward, tell us about the second transition.
Yes. So, I made what I consider a great decision for myself and stayed in and retired. But before my retirement, one of my goals was to complete my degree. And yes, I was on the 15-year plan of completing my degrees.
19, 19 years.
So, so, the important thing isn't not how long it takes you to do it, but that you do it, right?
Yeah.
And so it was really a personal goal and a professional goal of mine to complete my degree. And, I am still an advocate of experience over education when it comes to the big picture. But
But
not to downplay these things because companies they look for those degrees. And a lot of times that's a minimum qualification, right? So when I was getting ready to retire, obviously I had network. So recruiting once again, I count my blessings because recruiting is one of those career fields where you have to network. Like that's part of your job, right?
yeah.
So I was very fortunate in that I'm admittedly not a type A person. Like people think I'm very type A, I'm very social, I'm very outgoing, but I've grown into that. That isn't who I am naturally. So I had to learn, I had to get better at my job for the Air Force. And that all made me better in the long run. But I took those, I guess, those things that I learned and applied those towards my transition. So I started networking. I had close friends that had retired before me. I had already known where I was going to move. I knew how much financially I needed to, get by or to, at least satisfy my needs at the time. So I had all of that. And so, we'll talk about that, but, that was preparation. That's, doing your research ahead of time. But I will give all glory to the networking piece
Yeah.
because that's what led me to my first position with the nonprofit veteran service organization that I started out with after I retired. because I had a friend that worked there, and it just so happened that opportunity came available. And keep in mind, you can network, you can have these opportunities like presented to you, but you still have to interview, you still have to have a good resume, you still have to be the person that they want to bring on. So I think, we say this often. When I worked 3 years with a company called Next Stop Veterans, they're still a great organization. They're still around, based out of
Yeah.
Houston. I highly recommend them if you're in Texas. But they really taught me about, and I think a lot of the veterans that we spoke to, I would tell them, don't rely on other people. Nobody should care about your transition, your employment more than you. And unfortunately, I see that too often where they're just, I have veterans that are reaching out and they really just want you to get them a job at the end of the day. Like, they're not wanting to put forth the work. They just want somebody to write their resume for them, submit it. And I'm one of those people that, I tell them the hard things that they don't want to hear. I'm very transparent. And I'm like, look, I can't do the interview for you. Therefore, I shouldn't really be writing your resume for you. I can give you guidance. I can give you recommendations. I can give you feedback, but you need to be putting forth the effort into writing your resume. And when I was transitioning out, when I retired, I had, my friends look over it, and not just friends in the military, but friends that had transitioned, into successful careers afterwards. And they would give me feedback. I would take that, I would apply it, and it ended up working out. And I think, sorry, I'm rambling a little bit here, but
No,
I
no,
think,
it's good. I was like, this is like a
yeah.
master class. And I don't want you to stop, but I do want to point out a lot of people would call myself and you lucky, right? Because, we both have, I mean, our stories are so similar, and it's crazy that we're just connecting, but we both had, our husbands and us both, retired as well. So we obviously have a retirement pension, right? And whatever it may be. And we both had human resource careers that, really innately kind of set you up for networking, whatever. But you easily could have been the person that didn't take action. You easily could have been the person that has the cards really kind of like, you have the good cards in the deck, but you easily could have been the person that didn't do the work to get the results, right? But we have to recognize that you did the work. Yes,
Mhm.
you had this, and this, but I don't believe that that's luck. I believe that that's we chose our career fields. We, developed ourselves while we were in. We got our degrees. And you say it took you 15 years. It took me 19. I joined the Air Force not to go to school anymore. The only thing I did the entire time in the Air Force was go to school, right? But you do because that's what you need to do. And you also learned from your first transition, which some people don't do that. They transition 2 times and they don't learn. So I mean, this is like a master class. So let's talk about, you were discussing, I can't do your resume for you. That's one thing that we do at Vets to PM is we train you on how to write a resume. We no
Mhm.
longer do resumes. We used to. We used to
Mhm.
do resumes, right? Because that was kind of what we did. That was how we could provide. But now we've realized, 10 years strong, 18,000 veterans, no one gets far if someone does it for you. So let's start there. So you're now a recruiter, you talk to a lot of veterans, you talk to a lot of civilians as well. You're kind of mixed in both communities, right? And so
Mhm.
let's give a master class on how to prepare. So looking back now and based on your transition and based on the people that recruit, what are some things that military service members should be doing first year in to 5 years to 10 to 20?
Mhm. I would say definitely start thinking about what is coming post-military. And I was going to touch on this today. I'm so glad you asked, because there are so many different situations that lead up to a transition, right? It could be a medical reason. It could be you're just getting out at the end of your enlistment. Maybe your family situation has changed. That's forcing you to make some life changes. Maybe you're retiring. But regardless of that, we ultimately don't know when the end is going to come, right?
Nope.
We
And
can
it's the
say we
same
have
that way in
control.
the civilian sector too.
Right,
So
exactly, exactly. So there is this unwritten stability that I think we sometimes are sold going into the military. Sometimes that we just, think that that's the way it's going to be. I'm going to sign the dotted line. I'm going to stay in as long as they allow me to stay in. But you always need to be thinking about what's going to happen if this is not here tomorrow. Because, like you said, that's the way it is in corporate America. Corporate America is not going to blink an eye to let you go today and tell you this is your last day.
Exactly.
Um,
And just to give an example, my sister just told me this morning that her and her friend walked into their company and her friend had an HR meeting on her calendar. And she
mhm,
went and she didn't even see my sister before she left. She was told, "We're restructuring the department and today is your last day," and like took the laptop. And my sister
yeah.
was like, "Okay, well, I don't have an HR appointment." And I'm like, "Well, hopefully this has taught you to do everything that I've told you to do to network and prepare because it literally can happen that fast."
Yeah. Yeah. And don't compare yourself to anyone else, right? You can work with a team of people, everybody can be stable. You might be the person they let go for whatever reason, whether it be tenure, whether it be, maybe it's performance based. Obviously, there's an HR thing that's going to lead up to that if it's performance based, but you just never know what the circumstances are going to be. So the important thing is to continue to improve yourself, network, be educated about whatever field it is that you want to be in or that you want to stay in, and learn what you need to be marketable on the outside. So the people that, and as somebody that's not naturally a type A, this is difficult for me, but as an employment seeker, like you really need to be the most visible. You need to be the loudest person, not, I say loudest person in the room cautiously because you
Yeah.
don't want to be the obnoxious person, right? But you want to be somebody that, oh, I've seen them on LinkedIn or I've seen them post, some really great stuff about, professional development or, things that they're doing in their current career, or they've helped me out. Like I've had a conversation with that individual and they helped me out when I was looking. And so now I'm going to pay it forward. So the networking piece comes not only, it's about, don't think of it as, because I think when we put like an attachment, like it has to be done in order for us to get something out of it, then it becomes more of a task and not as
Yeah,
pleasurable
like
or not as
transactional. Yeah.
right. You want it to be about creating relationships. I mean, like, our conversations, like I fully foresee us having conversations years now, on down the road.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so, yeah, this is about making meaningful connections. And so when I, tell veterans to reach out to people on LinkedIn, like it's not to say it's not a transactional message, right? It's a, hey, I was wondering if, you would have time to, talk about, I know you work for company A, B, I'm just trying to learn more about the industry, to have a conversation. It's really just, like I said, having those conversations. So it takes the pressure off of the, oh, I'm going to reach out to these people and they're just going to tell me like I'm selling something to them or I want a job out of it. Well, yeah, I mean, that could be a nice little perk of having the
Yeah.
conversation, but these conversations should be about learning, they should be about growing, they should be about, making those connections. So when you're in your first, second, third, even 19, 20 plus years, we
Yeah.
can get stuck down this rabbit hole of just doing our job every day and not thinking about, what comes after. And I think my husband and I are a perfect example of that because I'm a planner. Typically, I didn't plan well in my first transition, but I'm typically a planner. I'm always like one of those people is like worst case scenario. I want to have a plan, and my husband's like, you always got to stick with plan B because you'll lose focus if you don't. Like you need to be focused on plan A. And yes, there's a combination of that, right? You need to be focused on plan A, but you also need to be thinking about what if plan A doesn't work out, in my opinion. So,
Yeah, and I always tell people now, and again, like hindsight, right, is a witch sometimes, but I'm glad that I had the people in my life in my career because I credit Gary DeVault and Michael Lindley and even, someone else who did not have a smooth and successful transition because she forgot why she retired. She retired prior to, having to, and then she spent 15 years wishing she had never retired. And so I'm grateful that I had those people in my life because one thing I always tell people is although the military obviously is a very different career, there's a lot more expected out of you. You literally sign the dotted line and you are agreeing that if it comes to it, you will die for your country, right? So obviously it's a very different employment contract. However, there are way more similarities between the military and the civilian sector that people give credit for. Number one, it is a career. It's a career. the military is a career. And
Mhm.
so is being a recruiter on the civilian side or a project manager on the civilian side, right? It's a career and it's a revenue stream. And once I started looking at my job as a revenue stream, that changed everything for me because I can go to my job, I can learn, earn, connect. Those are the three things that I think that everyone should do at a job: learn, earn, connect, right? And then I can take those skill sets, package them for maybe something else in the future because regardless of what you think, everyone has to take their uniform off, right, Tiffany?
Mhm. Yes, absolutely. That is very,
Yeah.
very true. And I agree with all of that because if you don't do that, it loses its value. Like when you talk about leadership, right? They talk about leading people and getting them to buy in on what they're doing, right? It doesn't matter if you're flipping burgers, it doesn't matter if you're working on the flight line, it doesn't matter if you're recruiting, but what value are you bringing to the organization? And have some like have care about that. Like what is meaningful to me in my job? Like, what do
Mm,
I care about? Is that it's affecting other people? Is that it's, I'm serving my country? Is it, that people are walking away with a freshly made burger, like, that I didn't drop on the floor? Like, what is
yeah,
meaningful? But find that value in the position that you're doing. And that will help you obviously be more passionate about the position, but then also help you learn about what ways can I improve myself in this, and is this something that I want to do long term. So regardless of whether you're in the military currently, you're transitioning, or in corporate America, like these things are what you're going to be are really going to drive you to success in whatever it is that you're doing, right? Because we
yeah,
hear the stories, like of the people on YouTube or that are on the reels that get cars bought for them and they're working at a fast food restaurant, but that was because they were showing passion about the position that they were in. They were walking, 5 miles to work because they didn't have transportation, but they cared about they cared about getting there. They cared about doing a good job. And then good came to them because of that. And I'm a firm believer in what you give in the world comes back to you. May not be
absolutely.
immediate gratification, but ultimately it
Absolutely.
comes like the effort you put in is what's going to come back. Yeah.
Yeah, and what you do in the military is meaningful. However, you are
Hmm.
issued a purpose. And so I always tell people, like, when you first go into the military, there's seasons in everyone's career. So you're learning, right? You're training, and so you're going to be all in. And then once you get into some sort of routine, right, and some sort of consistency, that's where we need to, in the Air Force, we used to have this saying, right? It's about the whole person concept.
Hmm.
That is not just for the military. Who are you as a person, right? And so make your career a part of your life, not your entire life. And
Hmm.
although the military does require a different level of commitment, you still can try to achieve life work balance and not
Hmm.
necessarily work life balance, right?
Hmm.
And your work, your job, your career, regardless of the roles and responsibilities that you have, right, can hopefully add to the rest of your life. But most of the
Hmm.
time, it will subtract from the rest of your life. And so now is the time to learn from the veterans who were all in and gave everything and maybe put aside their family and put aside their future because they wanted to be the go-to person. Like you can still be that go-to person, but still get a life. So make your career part of your life, get a life. And then I love what you talked about networking. You have to
Hmm.
deposit before you withdraw. You have to
Hmm.
deposit before you withdraw. So every day you go to work, I always say to myself, what can I learn and how can I add value today? So when I wake up, I say a prayer that involves that. What can I learn today to add to my skill set, right? And how can I add value today to where, because there is a difference between having an excellent rating and being valuable, because a lot of people will do all these things and be really good at what they do, but it's not valuable work. And so in the military, as you're preparing for the civilian sector, you need to learn, earn, and connect and make sure that you are preparing for your future. And we call it, future proof, right? What can you do now to future proof? So, what else do you suggest? So, based on the interviews that you do and based on the resumes that you're getting and the applicants that you talk about, we've discussed education and networking. What are some other tips and tools?
Yeah, and I think you kind of touched on one of the things that I recommend is that you don't just fill the blocks, right? That's one of the things. Like, okay, you're writing a perfect resume, or you've gotten to the point where you feel like you have a perfect resume, but you haven't prepared in the interview process, right? So I've worked with so many veterans over the years. I am almost 7 years post-military career now. So I've been in the corporate side of the world for 7 years now, worked with multiple different types of industries and companies at this point. From the veteran side, I feel like in recruiting, they told us to use all the tools all the time.
Yeah.
And I used to laugh because I was like, I hated cold calling. That was like, I just hated it, right? But that was part of the tools that we were using as recruiters. And I will tell you, whether it be because I was talking to so many people or what, but when I did use all the tools all the time and put passion in with all of those things, effort, true effort, recruiting business was so much better. And I hated to admit that, but it was. And so the same thing with applying, your efforts to the job search when it comes to your resume, when it comes to interviewing, when it comes to educating yourself about the industry or the company that you're interviewing and the position specifically. I feel like 9 times out of 10, well, I'll give it a little more credit than that. 8 times out of 10, they miss the mark, right? On one of those areas. They may have had a great resume, so they got an interview, but they didn't prepare for the interview. They didn't educate themselves on the company. They didn't, prepare to answer the questions, and sometimes not even prepare to elaborate more on what's on their resume. So God forbid they had that resume written by somebody else, made it sound
Yeah.
like they were so eloquent and very, had all this in-depth experience. And now the interviewer, the hiring manager is asking them to elaborate more on that, and they can't, or they struggle with it because they didn't write that. Um, and I've had retirees. I worked with one individual. He was 20-year retired Air Force, had been in supply the whole time he was in the military, had done a great job of educating himself. He gotten his PMP, he gotten his bachelor's in supply chain management, and then wanted to get an operations manager role at a large company. And but his resume was great, but he was terrified of an interview. We started talking about interviews, and I could feel the
Mhm.
shaking in his voice. Like he was that nervous. He's like, I haven't interviewed in 20 plus years. I don't know that he had ever interviewed really. Um, and so, we offered some resources for him. Obviously I gave him some feedback. And I don't know if I could say Canderful is one of those, great free resources for interviewing. I think you guys recommend it. I've always recommended as long as I've heard about it. But he used that resource to get better at interviewing, and he ended up landing the job. But you have to, and I think we tend to focus on our strengths and just go with those instead of focusing on our weaknesses. So we really need to like think, and we avoid that, right? I'm like,
Yeah.
well, I stink at that, and I think we talked about this when we spoke before. I was talking about Matthew McConaughey and him saying there were three things that they didn't allow to be said in their house, and it was, I can't, I hate, or to lie. And I think that really can be applied to, looking for a job. Don't say I can't. It's difficult. You're having trouble, but it's not you can't. You're just, how much effort are you putting forward to it? Are you working on improving yourself in that area that you can't do something in? Those are the things that you need to focus on, and it's hard for us to do that because it's not our natural inclination, right?
Yeah.
Um,
100%. And what's really important, to think about here is as a recruiter, I used to always tell people we have to keep the easy stuff easy, y'all. We have to keep the
mhm,
easy stuff easy. Don't complicate this, right? And so because there are going to be some more complex things like the interview. And I'll be honest with
mhm,
you, me and you, like we could go in and bomb an interview, even though we interview, thousands of people all the time,
mhm,
because everyone is a different interviewer. There's always
yeah,
going to be some sort of question that, trips you up, right? Or I'm a big vibe person. So if, vibe like VIBE. So if the vibe in the room is not good, I'm
yeah,
probably not going to be good, right? And
right.
so everything and anything is at play, but we have to keep the easy stuff easy. And so what's easy, right? We know who we are and what we do, right? So we should be able to write a resume and we will perfect it. Everyone will have a different school of thought when it comes to the resume. You just write it and you ask yourself, is this effective? Is this effective? When it's not effective, you rewrite it, right?
Mhm.
But along with that, we need to start interviewing. And so this is where your network can come in. I gave someone a challenge this week. I said, I need you to open up your contact list and I need you to contact 10 people and ask them to give you a mock interview. And I don't care
Mhm.
who these 10 people are. I want you say, hey, I need some help. Can you take 20 minutes and give me a mock interview? Whatever you think, just whatever question, you want to ask, whatever. And I said, the reason why you want to do that is because you can prepare to a point, but if you don't even know what they're going to ask you in an interview, it's hard to prepare. So, how good are you, right, when you are on the spot or when you're asked a question that you actually don't know an answer to? Can you flip the script? Can you change the direction? So start preparing now in order to, endure that complexity of an interview because it's not going to be easy. It's not going to be simple. Interviews suck. So,
Yeah.
right,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah. You're put on the spot. Yeah. I compare them to like going before a board in the military. It's like,
Yeah,
okay, you can be the best at what you do. You wouldn't be on that board for that award or that step promotion or whatever the case may be if it weren't for you doing your job well, right? But more often than not, no matter how good we are at what we do, when we're put on the spot like that, it becomes nerve wracking. And nerves are good, right? Because they show us that we care about what it is that we're doing. Or else we wouldn't be nervous. We'd be nonchalant. We'd be like, I don't care.
yeah.
We'd have that office space mentality, which, sometimes I worked in office space, but I don't recommend it out in corporate America. So, but yes, and so like you said, and it's so funny that you said the piece about oh gosh, in an interview, um, I lost my train of thought there.
Oh, okay.
Um, but but no, it's funny that you say that because I always tell people when I'm telling them about preparing for an interview, nobody knows what you bring to the table and your experience better than you. So have confidence in that. But the confidence fails where you haven't prepared yourself for the interview, right? So if you can't speak to what if you can't pull from those situations, those accomplishments, those things that you did, and so that's where I'm like, you're the pro on what you bring to the table. Just make sure you're preparing to bring those things out in the interview. Like you at least have an idea. And I love that you have that recommendation to have those mock interviews with people that just ask you random questions, because you also need to be prepared for that too.
Yeah.
Because 9 times out of 10, they're going to throw something on you that you couldn't have prepared for. And you need to be able to, speak to that. And I also recommend that don't try to, and I've been on the interviewing side where I've been the interviewer, and I've had someone talk to a question that I've asked them for like 5 minutes and not answer the question. And it was because they didn't have the experience. So acknowledge that you don't have the experience, but try to spin it in a positive way, right? If there's a similar system that you use that's comparable, or if you have similar experience which would make you be able to learn that process quicker and faster, that's the way. But please acknowledge that you do not have experience in that area, because you're not going to fool the subject matter experts, right? They're going to identify very quickly that you're talking around the question versus answering it. And 9 times out of 10, even if it is kind of a space filler while you get your thoughts together, they're going to think that you don't have the experience, because someone that does is typically going to be able to speak to that relatively quickly. So
Absolutely. And I will tell you, and a lot of veterans will disagree with me. I think me and you are very similar on LinkedIn and very similar, in our mentorship of veterans. Yes, we want to help you. Yes, we believe veterans are special. We
mhm,
also believe that you're actually less than 1% of the population that serves. And so when you're expecting people to adapt to you and people to try to understand you and ask you the questions about how your experience translates, you are already on the wrong foot. You are
yeah.
already on the wrong foot. And I talked to someone and said, well, recruiters should know. They should know are the three most dangerous words in the English language put together. Because now you're putting your control in other things and other people. And as a
Mhm,
veteran, you know this as well as I do. You can only control so much. Then
mhm,
you have to learn how to actually be resilient,
Hmm.
flexible, adaptable, agile, all the buzzwords that we put on our resume, right, Tiffany?
Right.
And
Yeah.
so, and we've talked about it before. I know immediately when a veteran is actually not resilient, not flexible,
Hmm.
not adaptable, not agile. And it usually is because they say, I can't, I don't know, no one told me.
Hmm. Yeah. And we talked about this before too. It's companies want to hire veterans, right? They
Yep,
do.
they do.
But don't get that confused with just because you're a veteran.
Woo!
Like,
Say it again. Say it again.
and I've worked with enough people, companies. So when I was with a nonprofits organization, all of our companies wanted to hire veterans. That's why they were coming to us because they wanted to hire veterans. But the biggest thing I learned, and this was my first job after the military, was yes, they want to hire veterans, but very few of them had the training programs in place to like grow you into that position. They wanted a veteran with experience. They wanted, because you have to look at it, and I've said this before, you have to look at it from a hiring manager perspective, from a company perspective. Take your veteran, hat where
Yeah.
everybody owes me something, because yes, they appreciate your service, but at the end of the day, it's about what do you bring to the table. Yes, we value the characteristics that you bring to the table from being in the military, but what additional value? Like I'm hiring you because you're loyal, because you're a hard worker, because you learn quickly, but what can you immediately bring to the company, and why would I hire you over your competition? So, you have to take your I'm a job seeker hat off for a second and look at it from a hiring manager or a company perspective. Like if I am, because everybody wants to go for the big companies, right? They want to work
Yeah.
for the Amazons, they want to work for Boeing, they want to work for, all these big companies.
Lockheed.
But
Yeah. Yep.
at the end of the day, your competition is tough, right? So what is your competition bringing to the table? What are their characteristics? What are they? What certifications? What education? What experience are they bringing to the table? Because that's what you're competing with. And I think we have made some progress in that. Some companies are implementing, those skill bridge, those training kind of pipelines to get people veterans up to speed in positions that they have a need for. But I think there's still a larger majority of jobs that are out there that, yes, they want to hire veterans, but you need to bring that valuable experience to the table. And they don't owe you anything, unfortunately. They don't owe you
No.
anything, and they don't have time to train you up to speed to be to the level that they need you. And I'll use an experience without saying a company name, but we worked with a company that was a large, organization in logistics supply chain, and they were really big on hiring veterans. They hired probably 5 veterans in a mid to upper level management positions, and they went through several rounds of interviews. So for those veterans, they did a great job getting their foot in the door. But then the company learned that there was a little bit more of a higher learning curve than what they had expected, and they hadn't set up like a training program in place. So
Yeah.
they were having to pull more of their managers to train these individuals and get them up to speed to where they could operate on their own than what they had foreseen. So they stood down, or they changed their criteria in that hiring, where instead of bringing somebody in straight out of the military, they wanted them to have like 3 to 5 years of experience, or 3 years of experience, I think it was. So, I mean, companies are trying, but this is the reason why, and you can say all day long that you can do this job for this company because you've done XYZ in the military, until you're in that seat and they're throwing things at you that you've never heard of or that you've never involved, because it is different.
Yeah.
Even in the simplest career fields where you think HR translates to HR in the civilian
Oh
world.
my gosh.
Misty, I'm sure you could talk about that all day. It's not the same. It's not the same. It's
No.
not apples to apples. So the more we educate ourselves, the more we network with people that are in those industries and the outside, the more educated we can be about that, and address the things that are lacking. And it can come down to something as simple as an acronym doesn't mean the same thing in the military as it does in civilian world. And you're talking like it is. Like in the interview, you're talking like they're the same things. And that's an immediate red flag to a hiring manager, because they're like, yeah, that's not what that means for us.
Yeah.
And I had to
Yeah.
learn
And
that
there's,
myself.
Yeah, and one thing too, you have to recognize that if you're in the interview, then you're qualified. So you don't have to prove that you're qualified. Now you have to prove what value can you add, right? Your
Hmm.
experience is your experience. You can't change it. No matter
Yeah.
how much you use ChatGPT and Google, you can't change what you did. You can try to reword it, but you can't change what you did. And you should be honest. We have to be
Yeah.
real. I mean, you and I have had EPRs in the Air Force that said we're in control of $2 million budgets. We're not in control of $2 million budgets. We may
Yeah.
have been in control of a line item on a $2 million budget.
Hmm.
So make sure that your resume actually speaks to your true experience. And if you get the interview, then that means that you are qualified. Now you have to speak to how you're going to add value, how you're going to fit with the team. And one thing that I did when I interviewed, I had to do a lot of preparation before an interview. So if I'm interviewing for an engineer position, for a 15, man department, right? A 15 engineer department, I have to figure out like what does each one have? What are we looking for? How will they fit, right? If I have
Hmm.
15 Excel gurus, the last thing I need to do is hire another Excel guru, right? And
Right.
so if you don't go to the next interview or get the job, most of the time, it's probably because you did not explain effectively how you can add value,
Hmm.
or the team doesn't need your skill set. And that's okay. Right. And we
Yeah.
we want to be mindful of, companies aren't hiring me and whatever. That doesn't mean that your value is less or that you don't bring much to the table. But this is business. And
Hmm.
so we're going to hire the best that we can in
Hmm.
order to help the business grow and develop. And so, yes, you can be a veteran, but if you don't have what the team needs, then you're not a good fit. And it doesn't
Hmm.
have anything to do with the fact that you're a veteran or that
Yeah.
you're hopefully it doesn't have anything to do with the fact that you're a veteran or that you're a man or a woman or your age,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
I would say most of the time, there's always exceptions to the rule, right?
Hmm.
What could look like bias, what could look like discrimination is actually just your skill set. What you bring to the table is not a good fit for the current team. And that is
Yeah.
just business.
Yeah. And I would add to that and just say avoid the victim mentality.
Mm,
Okay. Avoid the victim mentality. I've seen people go out on LinkedIn and talk about recruiters ghosting them. And, I've sent out 1,000 resumes. And I, I say this very carefully, but I would almost guarantee that talking to that person, 1,000 resumes, really? You have one area that you're focusing on, you send 1,000 resumes out for that and you didn't get any interviews. There's probably a few problems here. You sent it
yep.
out to maybe 10 different positions within a company, which most companies don't like that because they're like, what does this person want to do? Do they want to
Yep.
be a project manager? Do they want to be a field service technician? Like, what do they want to be? Um, and or they are not tailoring their resumes to the position. They're not doing their research. They're just doing that, spray and pray
Yeah.
type of job search. And I'm all about quality over quantity, because at the end of the day, that is going to mean something to the company that you're going to have invested, yes, more time on the front end, but you should be getting more on the back end. Um, and we don't know what a recruiter situation is, right? And so I've learned this, like when they used to say recruiters spend less than a minute on a resume, I've lived that life. I know that is in fact true now. And so recruiter, right? Recruiters
10 seconds.
are they are spending very little time. They're looking at keywords. They're looking at, job titles. They're looking at the years that you held the positions. They're looking, do they fill the minimum characteristics? And you can get through that very, very quickly.
Yeah.
If you have those things, and that's when we start digging into, okay, what accomplishments do they have that actually, are relevant under each of these positions? That's when we dig in a little bit more. And then we spend a little bit more than 10 seconds, but you can reject very quickly. Could we miss some people? Yes, but that's where
Yep.
you as a candidate need to make sure that those things are standing out on your resume and then speaking to those. When I mentor people on resume writing, I tell them a lot of times look at it like it's an outline to a paper,
Yeah.
with the subject being that job that you're applying for. Like if you have a professional summary, that should be like your introduction. That should be the grabbing, like this is why I want to read more down the paper. And then each of the positions you held are like, paragraphs or, parts of the paper that speak to that subject, and that are providing more value into the topic that you're writing on. So it all should flow together. If you're highlighting skills, I had a company that an individual highlighted a specific skill set, but unfortunately, that individual had only had like just a tiny bit of experience with it, familiarity. I think it was with a system, um, or some software. And because they had highlighted on a skill, they expected them to be proficient in it. So think about the skills that you're writing, and the whole
Yeah.
attention to detail. That's an old kind of antiquated one. I hope that has gone away because I haven't seen that a lot. But then, you used to say attention to detail and then see spelling errors and grammatical errors and everything else throughout the resume. So it's like, do you really have attention to detail? Just make sure that the skills you're highlighting, you're actually good at, right?
Yeah, and that you can prove it, because especially
Yes.
nowadays in interviews, like we're most likely going to assess you in some way, shape, or form. And
Yeah.
newsflash, Excel, Microsoft Office suite, and all that, that's like digital fluency. You don't
Uh-huh.
need to put that shit on the resume.
Right. Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
and I'll be real with you, because people, this is not referring to
Real talk.
anyone. So
It's real
please,
talk.
people, don't hate on me. But I have literally this week taught people how to schedule something in Outlook. So don't
Mm,
tell me that you are proficient in Microsoft Outlook when
yeah.
I'm teaching you how to schedule a calendar invite.
Yeah.
No. So you know how to use, this, whatever it is. We have to be very honest with ourselves.
Mhm.
And as we wrap up, Tiffany, I want to talk to you about, and we see this all the time, right? I retired as an E8, you retired as a
E7.
E7, my husband E7, whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you and I know, yes, there are some people that literally can go from this position to the equivalent, right?
Mm-hmm.
In some
Mm-hmm.
companies, there's some people, some companies.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the time that doesn't work. And tell us why, or talk us through, what we should actually be expecting instead, or looking for instead. Because when I retired, I immediately said to myself, I think that this is going to be a pretty difficult mental transformation for me.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to take the pressure off, and I'm not going to apply for HR manager or HR director, even though that would be the equivalent, right? I said, I just want to learn how to be a civilian, because I'm not quite sure that I can put a sentence together without the F word. So let me just learn the civilian sector. And so I
Right.
applied for HR generalists and stuff like that. And that's how I started. Then I
Yeah.
progressed in the company, but I didn't go out, wanting to achieve manager or director, because I actually just wanted to be an effective and valuable employee first. So talk us through that.
Yeah. Now, I think there is a caveat to everything that we say when we do these mentorship, calls, conversations, podcasts,
Always
whatever, is that
exceptions to the rule.
there always is an exception to the rule. So I'm never one of those people to put a blanket statement, because it's not a one size fits all.
Nope.
Everybody is a different personality. You can put two people that have done the same career field their whole military careers, and one will get a job straight out of the military and the other one will struggle. My husband and I, once again, we're a perfect example of each other, because my husband is very much, he didn't pursue his advanced degrees. But he has always been super, super successful. He can sell anything to anyone. He's a great communicator. Like, everybody loves him. And he speaks very confidently, and he is able to make something out of nothing. I am not that person. I either have it or I don't. And I can only speak to that. So I have to prepare a little bit more. I had to get my degree. I had to do, X, Y, and Z in order to be prepared, or at least have the confidence in myself to speak to it in an interview. Whereas he could go interview for a high level position without a degree and get it. And he did post military. But he also went through a period of struggle as well, where
Yeah.
he was, at the top of his game coming out of the military, especially if you're retiring. You're like the subject matter expert, right? You're not used to struggling at that point in your career. And then when you get out, you have to take a step back. And, you had mentioned grace earlier. And I think that's a big part of it. You have to allow yourself grace. This is all part of the preparation, mentally preparing yourself, having that resilience to know you're going to go through rejection, because there are the exception to the rules that step out of the military, and I being one of those.
Me too.
But like you said, it's about preparation. And I'm not going to say that is even 100. It's not not going to happen for everyone, right? It still isn't. But preparation is going to be key to that. But then also allowing yourself for that rejection and that grace. Because I talk to a lot of people who are like really struggling because they have been applying and applying and applying and nothing. And these are people that have been very successful in their military career and they're just really struggling with it afterwards. But there comes a time where you reach a burnout point. And so I'm very big on take time to step away. Like if you're treating this as you should as a job, it's a job to find your next career or where you're transitioning to out of the military, then allow yourself, even if it's a day, to just completely do whatever it is that makes you happy, that allows you some stress relief, whether it's hiking, whether it's, having a movie marathon, whether it's, whatever relieves that stress and takes your mind off of it. You need that as a reset. And as you said, you kind of did that and allowing yourself and kind of being realistic about your
Yeah.
expectations. Because if we think we're going to step into something that's equivalent to what we've been doing, especially after a 20-year career in the military, chances are probably you're going to have to take a step back. Once again, not saying that happens for everyone because it just depends on how you prepare, who you know, how you've networked. But you need to prepare for the worst case as well and make sure that you're financially set, that you know what those expectations are. And then be willing to, grow, because a lot of times we tell even companies when we're trying to sell them on veterans, right, is that, this veteran will come in and we've seen proof of it, will come in and do a job and pass up their peers much faster than if you were to take a
Yeah.
non-veteran and put them in that same position. And so you need to have that mentality. It's like, okay, I can take a step back. I can learn what corporate America is. I can learn what this job is on the outside, and then I can really move. And that if that requires you to switch jobs at a later time, then you have that experience in civilian life, corporate America, that you can add to your resume to give you that much more marketability. So be
Yeah.
a
And
set realistic expectations for yourself. Yeah.
absolutely. And especially in this job market. And so the last thing that I really wanted to provide some insight to the veteran community and military service members is about the job market. And so that's all we hear about, right? On LinkedIn and TikTok and IG and whatever, is that we're in this unprecedented job market and whatever it may be. And first and foremost, everybody for the most part will need to work and will need to earn money, right? And so we're not downplaying the severity of not being able to get a job and the severity of being in the job search mode for, I mean, we've talked to people that have been in job search mode for 12, 15 months and they're just not, getting any sort of traction. And so I just wanted to, as we end, give some maybe rapid fire tips. And one thing that I wanted to start with, and I just did this 3 times in the last month with the people that I've mentored, and it's worked out. And so
Mhm.
I tell people when you're in the job search, first and foremost, make sure that, you have your resume good to go. You can tailor it in less than 15 minutes. If you can tailor your resume in less than 15 minutes, then you know that you have a good resume, right? And then get your interview questions good to go. For the most part, they're not going to change. You're just going to be flexible when you're asked the question, right? And then keep networking. And those things should be like these things that you do all the time. Like even I have a full-time job and I'm consistently updating my resume, consistently, doing mock interviews with people, and then consistently adding value, depositing into my LinkedIn, my network. But the one exercise I tell people to do is decide on your commute, right? Of course, everyone wants probably a, virtual job, whatever it may be. Those might be few and far between right now. So decide on your commute. So 30 minutes each way, north, south, east, west, and you drive it. So you drive north, you come back. And as you're driving, do a voicemail or something, because you obviously can't write it. But what companies are you passing? What businesses are you passing? Every gas station, every fast food, every bank, every company and business. Then you come back, you go to your computer and you go to their companies and you see, are there any opportunities that you are qualified for and that you're interested in? Then go ahead, tailor your resume, apply, right? And someone said to me, I'm not working at a gas station. Is that better than not working at all? Because when you're not working at all, you're not learning, you're not earning, and you're not connecting. And so don't shoot down an idea, right? And so once you do north, then you do south, then you do east, and then you do west. And that should keep you busy. And that also should really create this diversity, right, of a job search, because a lot of us, just like you said, we're looking for Amazon, we're looking for
Mhm.
Lockheed Martin and those companies. So that's my first tip. I did that with 3 different people in the last, few weeks, few months, and they've all gotten jobs because of it. So as we end, Tiffany, I'd love to hear a couple of your tips.
Yeah. No, I love that. Honestly, I'd never heard that one, but I love it. And that kind of is one of the things that I recommend. And I don't want to say the exact same thing that you did,
No,
but
is your
one of
yep.
the things I recommend is that look for those smaller companies
Mhm.
because a lot of times, especially if the company's been around for a long time, when these mass layoffs occur, they're going to be the ones that keep their people because they're being a little bit more protective of their bottom line.
Ooh,
Um, and we always tend to go for the big names. We always tend to go for the big names. So I think your idea is great because Google, find out what companies are in the city that you work in. If you're looking for remote opportunities, like that kind of thing, look for the smaller companies because we there's your competition is going to be fewer because fewer people are applying for those positions.
yeah,
And so there's a lot of positives to be said about those quote unquote unknown name companies. You want to be careful. You want to do your research, see how long that company's been around,
yeah,
check out some of that. But at the same time, just because you don't know their name does not mean that you can't be a great candidate for them because number one, they could be very veteran focused and not advertise it because they don't have the big advertising budgets. They could have more stability because they're a smaller company. They could have more growth potential because they're a smaller company. You
yeah,
come in and you help them grow. You're a part of that. You can see the contributions that you're making every day. You're not getting lost in the sauce, as they say. And then interview preparation, like that cannot stress that enough because the resume is only part of the game. We talk about that's so hard. It's so hard because it is. Okay. It is
yeah,
difficult, especially if you're not, one of those people that's ever written a resume. But once you've won that piece, because there's so much advice out there, there's so many people willing to help. There's, AI, you can get your resume together, right? But once you get to that interview, that's the make or break. Like you said, you're qualified for the role. Now you've got to sell yourself the value that you bring to that company. So
yeah.
prepare yourself. I tell a lot of people, turn the job description into questions. So every line
Yes.
of that job description, turn it into a question. Like if they were to ask you this in an interview, can you answer? Can you give them relevant, information to back it up? Experience, accomplishments, the actual situation, that STAR method, right? The situation, the task, the action, the result. What did you do? Don't just say, yeah, I've done that. Or yeah, I've used that system. You need to be able to elaborate on it. But preparing for that is going to cover probably half the questions, if not more, of what they ask for. And you've prepared yourself for it. So you're not going in there going, oh gosh. Yeah, I know I've done it. It's been like 3 years now, but I know I've done it before. That way you already have, and that helps the nerves too, right? Because you know that you're prepared, at least for the most part, for what they're going to throw at you. And so those are two things that I bring. And then just reiterate allowing yourself some grace because we all need that reset sometimes, especially when the job search isn't going the way that we want. Um, and then also learn from each one learn
Yeah.
from, as you're searching for jobs, if you're actually looking at them as a way to, well, what are the qualifications that most companies are looking for? Well, I don't have that. So maybe that changes your job search, right? Because if
Yeah.
everybody's looking for a PMP and you don't have one, then you need to go get one and come back to the table, right? So that can be a learning process in itself. Just seeing what the job qualifications for positions are for multiple companies, being rejected, learn from that. Once again, the victim mentality. Learn to take them as learning experiences, don't take them as rejections, because that's
Yeah. And I
what it
always
is.
tell people, take feedback seriously, not personally, even if it's
Yeah.
personal. Even if it's
Yeah.
personal, because it can be personal.
Mhm.
We and people tell me all the time, like, well, what if I'm honest and they don't like the answer? Then you dodged a bullet. Because as much as
Mhm.
you want a job, I mean, obviously there's always exceptions to the rule, but like we have
Mhm.
to also be careful about, you know, being inauthentic and tailoring our responses to what we think they want to hear. And now you're working with people that you don't want to work with, and you're working at a company that's not going to fill your cup and not going to, make you feel good every single day, right? Because
Yeah.
that's where you get into that toxic culture, whatever. And you have to ask yourself, like, how did you contribute? Were you dishonest? Did you say what people wanted to hear? I mean, that's why you're in this position, right? And so we just have to be mindful of that. And the biggest thing to remember, I love that you brought up the job posting thing. You can do something like you can prepare right now. If you're serving in the military, just say you're watching this and you're 5 years in and you know you're going to go till 20. Every
Yeah.
week, download a job posting that sounds interesting to you and start highlighting what you have in common with that job posting. And then circle where you need to fill the gap. Do your own SWOT analysis for the future. And because you can prepare now for the future, but it's also going to help you in your current role. You know, people
Mhm.
ask me all the time, like, well, why should I get my PMP if I'm still in the service? I don't know. So you can be a more effective project manager while you're still in the service. It's not everything about,
Right.
what I'm going to get after. What can you do
Mhm.
now to develop yourself? And when you do a SWOT analysis on a skill set, if you're adding skills to your career portfolio, that's going to help you in your current career and it's going to help you in your future career. It's all about making yourself a more valuable employee, a better human being, right? Where you can go and add value to an organization if you're in a uniform or not.
Exactly. Exactly. Yes, that's very well said. Because yes, you don't look at it as I'm not going to use this right now, because you are.
Yeah.
Everything that we learn, everything that we bring or we add to our, I say, toolbox is valuable in not only what you're currently doing, but what you will in the future. Because it sparks new ideas, it sparks, better ways to improve processes. And then end result is just icing on the cake, right? You're that much more prepared for life after the military, whenever that comes. So, yeah.
Yeah, I'm so glad that we connected, Tiffany. I want
Yes.
to say that this is not going to be our last podcast. I think you have so much value to add. If people want to connect with you and maybe see what you offer as far as positions that are vacant, how can they do that?
Okay, so they can go to reliantcriticalinfrastructure.com. We do have a actual job page there. And typically, if you're a veteran, I'm going to reach out to you regardless of whether you're qualified for the position. I will caveat this with don't apply just because you're a veteran. Make sure that or reach out to me and say, hey, I'm interested in this position, Tiffany, and I will let you know whether you're qualified. And at the very least, we'll set up a time to speak and discuss like why I don't feel like you're, qualified at this time. And we'll have a discussion, we'll have a mentorship conversation. You can also connect with me on LinkedIn. I believe, well, not the only Tiffany Bradbury on there,
I'll put
but
it in the show notes.
yeah, yeah, yeah. But you can definitely connect with me on LinkedIn. I've connected with a lot of candidates and hopefully I bring value. Like I said, I'm going to be very transparent. I'm going to tell you what you need to hear versus what you want to hear. So just be prepared for that. I speak based on my own experience and corporate America, what I've learned from corporate America, and they're not going to sugarcoat it for you either. So, we're not doing anybody any justice by, making it all roses and rainbows.
And
Because
I
it's
will tell
not.
every military service member and veteran this, and every person that I meet, the person that tells you the truth is not the enemy. The person that tells you the truth actually cares about you. So if you think about the difference between kind and nice, I don't want any nice people in my life. I don't need any nice people in my life. But kindness means that people care enough about me to have the tough conversation, right? That believes that they're doing me an injustice if they don't. And so
Mhm.
when Tiffany, myself, and all the other military influencers out there that are telling you the truth, and maybe it's different from what you've heard, right? Just remember, we've been here. We've been in the service. We've transitioned. We work in corporate America. And so we can speak what we see. And everyone has a different experience, but the person that tells you the truth is not the enemy. Tiffany, thank you so much for joining the Military Transition Academy podcast. We'll put all of the relevant information into the show notes. And I do not believe that this will be our last episode. So, everyone who is listening, identify that transferable skill set, validate it with some sort of professional certification or education so you can show and tell to those recruiters and hiring managers how valuable you actually are. So that way you can land the job. It's not about the bachelor's degree or the certification, it's all about employment. So use your network, connect with Tiffany, and we'll see you next time. We release new episodes every Tuesday. Feel free to download and subscribe. Thanks for listening to the Military Transition Academy podcast by Vets to PM. We release new episodes every Tuesday, so make sure you follow and subscribe wherever you listen. You can catch up on all the previous episodes wherever you download podcasts or watch them on the Vets to PM YouTube channel. To learn more about our programs and upcoming cohorts, visit vetstopm.com. Whether you're a service member, veteran, spouse, or company looking to hire top military talent, we're here to help you become a project manager or hire one. See you next Tuesday.